How a bear almost ended the world. I know, it sounds like the setup to a really bad joke, right? But here's the thing, it's not a joke. And the punchline was almost, and I mean almost, total nuclear annihilation. So we're going to dive into the story of just how close we've come to the very end, all thanks to some of the most bizarre moments in history.
All right, so let me ask you this. What could a bear, the moon, and a flock of swans possibly have in common? Again, it sounds like a riddle, but the answer isn't some clever punchline. It's actually a pretty terrifying look at just how fragile our world really is. Believe it or not, they all nearly kicked off a nuclear war. And that's just the beginning. These are just a few of the totally, absurdly normal things that have pushed all of humanity right up to the absolute edge.
So let's get into our first section here, when nature called war. I mean, it's almost poetic, isn't it? The idea that our planet's own natural cycles and its creatures could be mistaken by our most advanced, most sophisticated technologies as an act of all-out war.
Okay, so imagine this. We're right in the middle of the Suez Crisis. Tensions are just through the roof. And suddenly, NORAD gets this terrifying alert. A bunch of unidentified aircraft are flying over Turkey. The world is literally holding its breath, bracing for a NATO nuclear strike, until someone, somewhere, figures out that those unidentified aircraft were just a flock of swans that the radar picked up. Yeah, swans.
So if you think swans are weird, how about the moon? Get this. An American early warning radar station way up in Greenland sends this absolutely frantic message to NORAD headquarters. The message, dozens of Soviet missiles are in the air, right now, heading straight for the United States. The only, and I mean the only reason they didn't immediately retaliate is that the Soviet premier just happened to be in New York City at the UN. The timing made zero sense. And sure enough, it wasn't a Soviet attack at all. The super advanced radar had been completely fooled by the moon rising over Norway.
And now for our main event, the title character. We're talking the absolute peak of the Cuban Missile Crisis, probably the most tense moment in all of human history. A guard at an airbase in Minnesota spots a figure climbing the perimeter fence. He thinks it's a Soviet saboteur, so he opens fire and hits the alarm. But, and this is a huge but, because of a simple wiring mistake, that sabotage alarm accidentally triggered the scramble alarm at a different base. So pilots are sprinting to their jets, which are armed with nuclear weapons, absolutely convinced that World War III has just kicked off. The only thing that stopped a full-blown takeoff was an officer in a jeep, literally racing onto the runway, waving his arms like a madman to stop them. And the saboteur? The great threat to world peace? It was a black bear. And you know what? Nature wasn't done with us yet. It had one more trick up its sleeve. This time, a massive solar flare erupts from the sun. It's so powerful it completely jams NORAD's brand new cutting-edge radar systems. Now, because this tech was so new, nobody really understood how it would react to something like a solar storm. So they didn't see it as a natural event. No, they interpreted it as intentional jamming by the Soviets, a clear act of war. A counterstrike with nuclear bombers came terrifyingly close to getting the green light.
So, as you can see, it wasn't just the natural world causing chaos. Sometimes the threat came from inside our own creations. And that brings us to our next section, Ghosts in the Machine. This is all about how our own technology, and just plain old human error, took us right to the brink. All right, first, a real quick definition you're going to need to know for this next part. It's called DEFCON. That's the U.S. military's defense readiness scale. It goes from 5 down to 1. DEFCON 5 is just normal peacetime. DEFCON 1, well, that's nuclear war. As you're about to see, a lot of these events we're talking about push that number way, way down. So check this out. It's 1979, and the duty officers at NORAD, the Pentagon, and Strategic Air Command all look at their screens and see the exact same thing, a massive, full-scale Soviet missile attack. This was it, the real deal. Except it wasn't. In reality, it was just one technician's mistake. He'd accidentally loaded a training tape, a simulation of an attack, into a live operational computer. And you won't believe how fast things spun out of control. We're talking about 6 minutes. In just 6 minutes, that one wrong tape triggered a full-on alert. Procedures for retaliation were already starting. The president's emergency doomsday plane actually took off. It was pure chaos. The whole thing only ended because one person had the presence of mind to say, hey, wait a minute, let's check the actual raw radar data, and they saw absolutely nothing. 6 minutes. It was over in 6 minutes, but can you imagine what that felt like for the people in that room? It must have felt like a lifetime. And sometimes, the failure isn't even a person. It's just a piece of metal. A B-52 bomber, carrying 2 extremely powerful nuclear bombs, literally broke apart in midair over North Carolina. As one of those bombs fell to the earth, 5 of its 6 safety devices failed, one by one. A later investigation found that a single, simple, low-voltage switch was the only thing that prevented a massive nuclear detonation on American soil.
Okay, I want you to put yourself in this situation for a second. Imagine you're the commander at Strategic Air Command. You're in charge of America's entire nuclear arsenal. Suddenly, you lose contact with your main early warning radar in Greenland. Okay, weird. So you try to call NORAD headquarters to figure out what's going on, and that phone line is dead too. The chances of both of those things failing at the exact same time were practically zero. So what's the only logical conclusion? You're under attack. And that's exactly what they thought. An order was given for the entire alert force to get ready for takeoff right then and there.
And all of this, it leads us to what might be the most chilling part of this whole story. Because what happens when the machines fail, when nature tricks you, and when the official rules demand you go to war? Well, sometimes everything comes down to one single person.
The number 1. That's it. That is the number of no votes it took to stop the launch of a nuclear torpedo during the absolute peak of the Cuban Missile Crisis. Just one person saying no.
So there's this Soviet submarine, the B-59. It's deep underwater near Cuba, completely cut off from Moscow. The crew is at their breaking point. It's hot, they're exhausted, and U.S. destroyers are dropping these non-lethal depth charges all around them, trying to force them to surface. From their perspective, World War III had already begun. So the submarine's captain and the political officer, they both agree, it's time. Launch the nuclear torpedo. But here's the catch. Launching required a unanimous vote from 3 senior officers. And the third man, Vasily Arkhipov, said no. He refused. He managed to calm the captain down and convinced him to surface instead. He single-handedly stopped a naval nuclear war from breaking out.
And believe it or not, about 20 years later, a scarily similar situation happened, but this time on the other side. A Soviet officer named Stanislav Petrov was the man on duty when the early warning satellite system started screaming that 5 nuclear missiles were incoming from the United States. Now, the protocol was crystal clear: report the attack to his superiors, which would trigger an immediate massive retaliation. But, as he said later, something just felt off. He just had a funny feeling in his gut. He didn't want to be the person who made that kind of mistake.
Just stop and think about the pressure on these 2 men for a second. You have Arkhipov on a sweltering submarine with explosions going off around him, being told to fire. Then you have Petrov staring at a screen blinking incoming attack, being told to report it. Both of them were under unbelievable pressure to just follow the rules, to do what the protocol demanded, to escalate. But they didn't. They both trusted their gut, their human intuition. Petrov figured, wait a minute, a real first strike from the US would be hundreds of missiles, not just 5. Arkhipov reasoned, we don't actually know for sure that a war has started. They both went against their orders, and they both saved the world.
So, when you take a step back and you look at all these different stories together, there's really only one conclusion you can come to. It's inescapable. We have been so unbelievably, absurdly lucky.
And when you actually break down the causes, a really clear pattern starts to emerge. Yeah, nature threw a few curveballs at us that caused some pretty terrifying moments, but the vast majority of these near misses, they came from us, from within. They came from our own flawed systems and our own simple human mistakes. So let's just do a quick recap of the pure chaos we're talking about here. The world was almost ended by a bear climbing a fence, the moon, someone putting the wrong training tape in a computer, a single tiny faulty switch, a storm on the sun, a bad wire, a dead phone line. Oh, and here's one we didn't even have time to get into, a Norwegian research rocket that was just studying the northern lights. I mean, the list is just as ridiculous as it is terrifying. Somehow, we have managed to dodge and weave and just get plain lucky our way through decades of these incredible close calls. We survived bears and bad wiring, and we survived because a couple of guys had a gut feeling that went the right way. But I have to end this with a question, one for you to really think about. How long can our luck possibly last?